Good Monday evening to you. Welcome to Charting with Dan. I am Dan, here with Lon Harris.
Hey, good to be here.
The show keeps getting recorded later and later, Lon, and I have a charting problem.
We're deep into the night.
Big Honest Trailer tomorrow also.
That's true.
So a lot of stuff going on, but really more than anything, I was making too many charts. So
we'll just start calling this Screen Junkies Up All Night.
I know, right? Screen Junkies is going to be into Tuesday morning before too long. But let's talk about the box office weekend that just happened. Hobbs and Shaw, as expected. The #1 movie of the weekend. Pretty much right at where a lot of the industry had expected it to be, right at $60 million. That constitutes the 5th best opening for a Dwayne Johnson film. All 5 of those movies are in the Fast and Furious franchise. It's this one and the 4 Fast movies that he's been in. But there's a lot of things that we're going to look at here and in a little bit. How The Rock does internationally, how these movies do internationally, what this means for the future of the Fast and the Furious. But let's look at the top 5 list that this movie, Hobbs and Shaw, did not crack, which is the top 5 films opening domestically in the Fast and Furious franchise. Those still remain the previous 5 films in the Fast and Furious franchise, Part 7, Part 8, Part 6, Part 5, and Part 4. I think that's the chronology of them, too.
Probably. I don't know. Tokyo Drift's got to be in there somewhere.
But Hobbs and Shaw falls about $10 million short of cracking that top 5. Now, of course, this was not a Fast and Furious proper film. This was a Fast and Furious Presents film. But I think a lot of people, as we were going into the summer, looking at Hobbs and The Rock, that character, adding in the 5th film, and then with Jason Statham and spinning these 2 guys off, I think a lot of people were looking at that and saying, like, okay, will this be a companion? Will this be a one-off? Is this maybe where the franchise is headed, where you can retire the Fast and Furious franchise, and now maybe this franchise could become, kind of pick up that torch? And what we saw domestically, and we'll look at the worldwide numbers, although there's a lot of things that are still to be determined worldwide for this film, I think domestically it's playing much more like a sequel or a Rock Dwayne Johnson solo film than a film in the Fast and the Furious franchise.
It's interesting. I think
of late.
Yeah, I think even I went into this year. I'm a fan of this franchise, and even I kind of assumed like it's the brand. It's not the specific Fast and Furious movies. It's the brand, the identity of this franchise. That's what matters to people. And I think maybe not. I think there is something to that core cast of characters, that sort of continuity from the previous movies that obviously was important to people making the decision to maybe stay home, check this out another weekend. Like, this didn't perform like a Fast and Furious.
And to be very clear, we're not sitting here saying that it did poorly at all.
Of course
not saying that at all.
No.
This was a very expensive movie.
Right.
But at the same time, this is not us saying it was a disappointment. It's more of just like when you're looking at expectations and where a film like this falls, this was an open question going into the summer.
Sure.
As far as would this chart the course ahead for, no pun intended, for the Fast and the Furious franchise. And when I mentioned that this movie is performing a little bit more like a solo Dwayne Johnson venture, looking at I've come up with the official name for it. It's the Bits Index.
Okay.
The Butts in the Seats Index. Looking at the Bits Index, now Hobbs and Shaw is Dwayne Johnson, is The Rock's top opening outside of the Fast and Furious franchise, meaning not a sequel to the Fast and Furious franchise. Right. Let's look at those numbers. And if you look at the attendance, these numbers are very similar. 6.6 million tickets estimated sold domestically for Hobbs and Shaw. That's just above Moana. That's a little bit above San Andreas. The Scorpion King, believe it or not, still one of the top 5 as far as attendance goes domestically. Openings for The Rock. There's a drop off, and then you have Get Smart, which a lot of people say, well, that's not a Dwayne Johnson movie. He was 3rd credited.
It's true.
In that film.
He was still sort of coming up. It was the earlier phase of his film career.
But as you see, Hobbs and Shaw falling into a very similar range as far as turnout to other films that relied very heavily on The Rock, on Dwayne Johnson. Now, of course, people came to see Jason Statham. People came because of the Fast and the Furious name. But when you're looking just at how it performed and the fact that the other properly Fast and Furious proper films of late had much higher both attendance numbers and box office numbers, I think you're seeing which way perhaps the marketplace skewed, which is more toward this is an action movie with Dwayne Johnson and less toward this is something I have to see to keep up with the Fast and the Furious
Right,
franchise.
one of those big team-up event movies. Yeah.
So we are going to look a lot more at Fast and the Furious in a little bit, but let's look at the rest of the top 5 before we get to that. At number 2, The Lion King with a little under $40 million, $38 million there. It dropped another 50% to come in second place. The Lion King continues to hold a little bit more like a blockbuster than a family film. Having said that, it's doing all right. As a matter of fact, it just did something weird. It just passed itself. Because The Lion King is now, it is an animated film. It is a computer animated film. The Lion King just passed itself domestically to become the 4th highest grossing domestic film of all time. The Lion King 2019 just passed The Lion King 1994. If we can look at that one. If you're looking at now, these are, of course, the raw numbers, meaning these are not adjusted, but you hit like Lion King, boom, boom, 1, 2, behind Incredibles 2, Finding Dory, Shrek 2. It's going to pass Shrek 2 very soon. But some caveats to put onto this, which is that, yes, while you look at the raw numbers, The Lion King just passed The Lion King. It's a weird world that we live in.
It's like the Endgame Avatar one, but even more severe. Like it's like Disney fighting Disney. This is literally Simba on Simba.
This is literally, and it's the same movie.
Yeah,
it's the exact same movie, just past the exact same movie on the charts.
You want the lions to look real or cartoony?
It's literally like a special feature that you can turn on and off of a DVD or a Blu-ray. However, caveats. The Lion King, the original, obviously came out in 1994. If you adjust for inflation, it made over $800 million compared to still a great number, but the $450-ish million that The Lion King 2019 has made. If you look at attendance, this Lion King 2019 has sold about 48 million tickets so far. 1994's Lion King, in its original theatrical run, sold about 74 million tickets. It sold about 89 million tickets through all of its re-releases since its lifetime. So yes, again, you look at all sides of the equation. The new Lion King does now occupy that number 4 spot that was occupied by the old Lion King. But as always, when you look at it by other metrics and by other numbers, you really can see the drawing power. I mean, domestically, The Lion King is the highest drawing, as far as attendance goes across its lifetime, the highest attended animated film of all time. Caveat, since we've been able to track these things, but if you throw in Snow White, it just goes to show, there's always an if or a but or a maybe.
No, there's never, we talk about this all the time, there's never a direct one-to-one comparison. You're always comparing different movies that had different competition on different weekends when
what metrics could be tracked and who could keep what records.
And movies cost different, and there's never an equivalent. You're always kind of dealing with a lot of variables.
But right now, The Lion King is past The Lion King, so congratulations to The Lion King, and I won't say which one I'm congratulating.
Only The Lion King.
And only The Lion King. You know who you are. Let's look at the rest of the top 5. It makes it easy. If they keep doing this, it'll just be like 2 movies that constitute the whole top 10.
Yeah, it'll be like, well, and Aladdin tops Aladdin.
Yeah, exactly. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is in at number 3 in its second weekend. It dropped about 50%. Not too terrible. Again, 50%. That's about where you want to be. We'll see how it holds. It's already Quentin Tarantino's 4th highest grossing film. Looks to be on track to become his 4th film to break $100 million domestically. It will also break into the top 10 summer list. Probably today it will unseat Men in Black International to become the 10th highest grossing film of the summer.
I think it's benefiting from controversy, this one. I think that it has fueled a lot of conversations, and a lot of people who like movies and follow movies want to see it so that they know what side they come down on.
You certainly don't know what to expect.
Yes.
With this one.
I feel like more so than his last few, Hateful Eight and Django, which were, had a lot of fans and were aimed at Tarantino fans, but this one is generating mainstream conversations about the time period and the Manson family and Bruce Lee and all sorts of other things. And I think that conversation is really helping this movie.
I still think those stars are putting butts in seats.
Oh, I definitely think it never hurts to have Leo and Brad and Margot Robbie.
Yeah, that does not hurt at all. Spider-Man Far From Home coming in 4th place. It dropped a little over a third from last weekend. And Lon, we've been looking at the Spider-Man attendance week by week, but I wanted to sort of zoom out and see where it stands overall, just as far as the franchise goes. It is now the first Spider-Man film since Spider-Man 3 to sell 40 million tickets domestically. It has outsold Spider-Man Homecoming. Now, this is not, before we've been going like through X number of days, this is total tickets sold. So Spider-Man, those other numbers other than Far From Home are not going to change. So Spider-Man Far From Home, it's not going to overtake Spider-Man 3, but it's going to close that gap. But again, I think it just shows, as we've been tracking throughout, that people are sort of have a rejuvenated interest in the character and the franchise as it's tied into the MCU. Sony, I'm sure, is very happy. And I have a feeling, even though it wasn't on Kevin Feige's big board, that we're going to hear about vague ideas, at least, of when we can expect a new Spider-Man film.
No spoilers, but yeah, after you see the way that Far From Home wraps up, how much money it made, there's no way they're going to wait more than 2 or 3 years before getting another one of these on track. No way.
No, and especially because it is not, famously, with the strategy for this film, it's not up to Disney.
Right,
It's not all up to Marvel. Contractually, I don't know how all that language works out, but I think they both need and want each other in each other's lives. They're like it's like a green card marriage, Disney and Sony. It's messy at times. I watch 90 Day Fiance, so I know about all these. It's messy at times, but they both need each other for different reasons.
They've got vested reasons to see it through.
They have vested reasons. So I think they're going to stay at the altar, but we'll see. You never know. And rounding out the top 5 domestically, you got Toy Story. It's on the cusp of doing a few different things in the Pixar record books, in addition to getting closer to $1 billion worldwide. So it's in the top 5 for Pixar. It's doing some things worldwide, but we're going to talk a little bit more about that in the next week or two. Also, just because we got some other stuff to get to today. So let's look at the top per theater average. Loose is the winner of the top per theater in 5 theaters, $26,000 in 5 theaters. This was a film that was a breakout at Sundance earlier this year. Naomi Watts and Tim Roth are the adopted parents of a high school students from Eritrea. Who named Luce, who's played by Kelvin Harrison Jr., and he has a conflict with a teacher played by Octavia Spencer. And I haven't had a chance to see this. It's been incredibly well reviewed.
Yeah, it was thus far. Even when it was at Sundance, I remember this was a real buzzy one from earlier this year. I'm looking forward to seeing this one. The trailer for it looked great, and it's very much an examination of prejudices, of race, of who do you believe? Who do you trust? And it looks really, really compelling. It looks interesting. And I even when I was reading a review, I believe I was reading a review of Ma with Octavia Spencer, and they were like, "Why would Octavia Spencer do this when she's capable of Luce?" So this was like the good example compared to Ma's.
I didn't think she was bad in Ma. I didn't like Ma that much, but I didn't think she was terrible.
I'm just citing this review. I'm not. I think Octavia Spencer's wonderful.
I thought they should have let her loose more in Ma. I thought she was constrained. Second place, just to note, per theater was The Nightingale, which is the follow-up for Jennifer Kent to The Babadook.
Right.
Nightingale played in just 2 theaters.
Reputation is a very brutal and uncompromising movie, which is probably going to hurt it box office wise, but I would still like to see it. I'm going to watch it. It's been on my list, and I'm going to watch it this week because I very much want to see what it's about. I love The Babadook, and I'm excited to see what Jennifer Kent does next. Lon, as always, we're going from the micro look at per theater to the macro look at the entire world. Let's look at the top 5 worldwide. Hobbs and Shaw, the #1 film this weekend with over $180 million. But we are going to put a huge asterisk on this because, Lon, it did not open in China this weekend. China, as we've talked about with Fate of the Furious and with a lot of Dwayne Johnson movies, China is a huge market, both for The Rock and for the Fast and the Furious. It's not going to open in China until later this month. The reason being, this is the part of the year, the part of the movie-going season. This happened with Ant-Man and the Wasp. I believe it happened with Spider-Man Homecoming as well. There's a certain part of the time of the year, pretty much unofficially in China, where they focus on their domestic film slate, as we're going to see here in a couple of minutes.
and where the Hollywood films are sort of pushed out. So this year, the big blockbuster movie that does not get a day and date release in China is Hobbs and Shaw. It opens there at the end of this month. So we're going to have a few weeks here where we see Hobbs and Shaw sort of start its run and wind down here in North America. It's open in most of the rest of the world. However, South Korea is one market that it's not open in, but especially China at the end of this month. That is a huge piece of the box office puzzle for this movie. So, a lot of people might look at that opening and say like, oh, that seems like it might be a little soft for a Fast and the Furious movie. Well, a large part of that is because Fate of the Furious, for example, was one that opened massively in China and big splashy headlines. We're not going to know what happens with Hobbs and Shaw for a few more weeks.
Yeah, I mean, it's part of the reason, like, franchise. I feel like Fast and Furious was one of those franchises that really led the way in that. Like, it is designed for an international audience. These are American action films, but they're no longer constrained by being in America. They're globe-trotting international casts, and it's really poised very well to do that. So, yeah, this is a movie that, for Asian audiences, feels organically, it feels like right to them.
Yeah, and that's actually a trend that we're going to look at in a minute as we talk about the future of the Fast and the Furious. There is a blockbuster powerhouse that is steamrolling its way through the Chinese box office right now. We talked about it a little bit last weekend. It did better this weekend than it did last weekend.
Wow.
And that is Neijia, the animated film that is a character from Chinese mythology, a very traditionally a popular, well-known character in China. Many iterations of the story have been told. However, this iteration, already one of the 10 highest grossing films ever in China. It's the highest grossing animated film ever in China. I was reading some stories today saying that it is on track to become maybe one of China's 3 highest grossing movies of all time. It is on track to outgross Avengers Endgame in China. This is a massive film. As I mentioned, last week it made about $98 million. This weekend it made about $122 million. So this is one of those movies every year that we watch that just pops and becomes a breakout hit.
Yeah.
Pretty crazy. Another one that came in 4th place, again, opened only in China. This past weekend, last Thursday, was Army Day in China, which is one of a few, several local holidays.
Right.
The Bravest opened on that day and then spilled over into the weekend. That is a story of Chinese firefighters that's part of a planned trilogy of films about real-life Chinese heroes. It's loosely based on a real story. That is the 4th highest grossing film in the world. Again, based just off the Chinese gross. So every year right around this time, we're always talking about, it's a Wolf Warrior 2 or something like that. These movies that when China, has decided we're taking these weeks to push our domestic slate, this is when we see these movies bubble up every year and rack up huge grosses. Yeah.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, I'm still looking. I'm looking for the day when it starts to come back at us. Like when we start getting the big Chinese movies over here. I feel like it's inevitable at this point. It's just a matter of time now.
Yeah,
their industry continues to grow and get more and more professional and high end. These movies look like Hollywood productions. They feel like Hollywood productions.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting.
I wonder if there'd be a tariff on Chinese movies. Would we have to pay 20% more? I don't know how it works.
I'm sure the president's thinking it over right
That's
now.
for Congress to figure out. I don't do that kind of charting.
Let's not go there
Let's
on
not
charting.
talk about that. Yeah, that's a whole other show. In 3rd place was The Lion King. It opens in Japan this weekend, but then it has only Italy left as far as major markets to open in. So open just about everywhere. And then Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, that's actually just its domestic output there. For worldwide box office, it's still yet to roll out in most places. So Hobbs and Shaw, a big start to the weekend with a massive market yet to come still in China. So let's talk about Hobbs and Shaw and the Fast and the Furious franchise, because I wanted to look at these numbers and see what does it tell us? What does it tell us about what people are seeing? What have they seen? Is The Rock the star to carry this franchise forward, or are they going to hew a little more closely to Vin Diesel and the original crowd? So I wanted to just let's look at all the numbers and then try to draw our own conclusion.
We're in a real moment of truth for the franchise. Now, there was the early part where they thought maybe we'll do like Tokyo Drift and we'll keep spinning it off into different race movies. And then they sort of figured it out in that 4th and that 5th movie. There are these globe-trotting ensemble heist adventures. Now this is like the next theory on maybe we can make it work as we'll keep spinning off members of the team to do solo films. And this film's success or failure is really going to determine how that works.
Well, let's look at how it has worked traditionally in the domestic front. These are the butts and seat numbers. This is the bits index for the entire franchise from a domestic standpoint. This is opening weekend. Opening weekend, how many people went to see each film. And as you can see, Hobbs and Shaw, while it was the #1 movie of the weekend, was actually the second lowest number as far as actual people that bought a ticket, just above Tokyo Drift, which was a huge drop off. But Fast and the Furious, Too Fast, all of the other sequels.
Look at that, under the original The Fast and the Furious.
Yeah.
Wow, that's surprising.
As far as just estimated tickets sold, just number of people that went and saw a ticket.
Because if you remember the first one, there were no big marketable stars in that first one. Paul Walker, Vin Diesel, they were still very much like up and coming. It was kind of a mid-budget, the kind of movie they don't really even make anymore, like a mid-budget action cop thriller. So it's really surprising to see that sold more tickets in his first weekend than Jason Statham, The Rock, this huge marketed adventure, international, Idris Elba. Yeah. That is surprising.
When you look at that trend, though, obviously, the Fast and Furious was largely a reaction to that huge sharp downturn with Tokyo Drift. And then you see that upward momentum. Now, Furious 7, unfortunately, had the real world came in on that film. And I think that's probably part of the reason you have that huge spike. But I do think they still would have ridden a lot of momentum from Fast and Furious 6.
For sure.
In a much nicer and fairer world where Paul Walker, unfortunately, that did not happen.
Yeah. It's also, I always come back to this in some ways. It was, I mean, obviously the loss of Paul Walker, it was a huge story. People were talking about it. People felt very emotionally. I went to go see the movie. But it was also that single, that Wiz Khalifa See You Again single was all over the radio. That, I think, helped to get people motivated to go see that movie.
Yeah. Looking at that, though, I think the one thing that you want to see and the one thing that Universal's going to look at and everyone else is going to look at is whenever the next Fast and Furious comes out, what is that next spike? Is it a spike? Is it a straight line? Does it, because you don't want, hopefully if you're Universal, you don't want to see this become a decline. That is going to be so indicative. Now, I think if Hobbs and Shaw had been up there in the 10 to 11 million range, then it would be a little bit more of just like maybe we can do both. But I think now, looking at these numbers, they may be saying like, all right, it's not a failure by any stretch of the imagination. However, it is obviously not proven to be, at least in its opening weekend, the kind of draw that these other films have been in the last 10 years or so.
Yeah, we know we're getting Fast 9 and 10. That's the deals are done. They're making 9.
Yeah.
So it's really just a matter of, are we going to get 2 or more contiguous franchise? Are we going to get that going and these side adventures?
Yeah.
If you're writing the script right now for Roman and Tej, you're really watching this closely.
Now, that's domestically.
Right.
Now, the reason that I say that China is going to be such a huge part of this puzzle is that increasingly, since the fourth film, the overseas, the foreign markets have been more and more important in the growth of the Fast and the Furious. China has been a huge part of that. As a matter of fact, these are the 8 films in the main Fast and the Furious franchise. And if you look at what the trend has been, obviously Fast and the Furious, Too Fast, both were driven by domestic grosses. Now, part of this is also that the international and global market over these last, since Fast and the Furious started, has really opened up. But again, look at that. Really, I mean, Tokyo Drift was the first film to have a bigger foreign gross than domestic. Then Fast and the Furious, it escalated. Fast 5, and then, I mean, just look at the way that trend has continued to the point where, Fate of the Furious is below Furious 7 domestically. But still far outstripped by the fact, and over $1 billion globally.
Yeah.
So just globally, not including domestic at all. 7 and 8 both made over $1 billion. If they didn't make $1 in the United States, they were still billion-dollar hits.
Yeah, and I mean, if you look at it, like it sort of makes sense in some ways because the early movies, they're crime dramas. They're very they're culturally specific. They play on a lot of other American sort of crime films and gangster movies. And as soon as you see that trend go up, that's when they turned into much more broad heist movies that are easy, accessible, and focused on big action set pieces.
So obviously the global market, a huge, huge piece of the puzzle. The other question when we talk about Hobbs and Shaw, people looked at The Rock.
Sure.
No offense to Jason Statham, but Dwayne Johnson, the global superstar. Jason Statham, certainly.
We don't have a crank and transporter chart.
Exactly. No. Yeah. Exactly. There's no disrespect to Jason Statham, but The Rock has been like this force, this global
an international
force,
superstar,
an international superstar. So I think a lot of people are saying like, okay, if Vin Diesel, if we should decide to retire that, or if we should just make fewer Fast and the Furious anchor movies, and do we make more Hobbs and Shaw movies? Like, is The Rock the guy to carry that torch forward?
Yeah.
Part of it because he is an international superstar.
He's got that franchise Viagra.
He does. But I wanted to look at
reputation.
that. Because a lot of the reputation has been that The Rock was an international superstar who came in and revived the Fast franchise. And so because of that, he should be the guy that they hand the keys to. But I think that maybe it might have more to do with the Fast and the Furious than we thought. Because I looked at the numbers for Dwayne Johnson before he joined the Fast and the Furious cast and after. So here are the Rock's numbers before joining the cast of Fast 5. These are the movies that he starred in, starting with The Scorpion King. And if you'll notice, every single one of those films was the gross was driven by the domestic gross, meaning every single one of those movies had a higher gross domestically than it did in international markets. Now, that's not to say that any of these films were failures or that these were flops. It's just that The Rock going into Fast 5 generally had been a bigger draw domestically than internationally. Like I said, there are other factors, including the fact that the global box office has grown. But even a movie like Doom or, Race to Witch Mountain, which, by the way, watch Race to Witch Mountain. Look at that ratio, and then when we look at the next chart, we'll look at the same too. Domestically, though, every single one of them higher domestically. Now this doesn't include the Fast and the Furious movies, but these are The Rock's films after he joined the cast of Fast 5. So this is post Fast 5 when you look at the gross for The Rock's movies, and it absolutely inverts. Starting with Journey to the Mysterious Island, which is a film very much like Race to Witch Mountain, but now all of a sudden it has a much higher foreign gross. G.I. Joe Retaliation, a much higher foreign gross. Now, Pain and Gain and Central Intelligence are the two that break the trend.
Right.
But look at the margins on the other ones. The comedies, a little more, well, Pain and Gain is a very American-based story, and it's a much smaller movie.
Yeah, I mean, I think both Central Intelligence and Pain and Gain, they are comedies. Like Pain and Gain is a very dark, satirical comedy, but both very culturally specific, very tied to American culture and observations of life. It does make some sense that those wouldn't have the breakout of like a huge action juggernaut.
Right. Yeah. But I think the question you have to ask yourself is, the perception was that the Fast franchise was driven to global fame by the star power of The Rock, or that was certainly the main factor in that. I would posit, looking at those numbers, that while The Rock was certainly known overseas, that it may have been, and also looking at the fact that the fourth movie, Fast and Furious, had started the trend.
Right, that's what I was going to bring up.
Had started the trend really realistically, because Tokyo Drift did so poorly domestically, had started the trend of the franchise starting to break out worldwide. I would posit that it may have been a little bit more linked together, that it wasn't necessarily The Rock that made the Fast franchise a global powerhouse. A lot of it may have been the Fast franchise making The Rock a global powerhouse, because you'll see that almost everything he's done after Fast 5 has clicked bigger internationally than anything he did before. And like I said, obviously a big part of that is the growth of the international market, but you still have to have stars to market, to sell.
Yeah, I mean, you could see that the Fast franchise begins building movie over movie before The Rock comes in. It starts with Fast and Furious, the fourth one, which is it reunited the cast of the first one without The Rock. Yeah, so it was Vin Diesel and Paul Walker came back.
Yeah. So I think what I'm going to be looking for, and what I think a lot of people should be looking for, is how Hobbs and Shaw does, how it does internationally, how it does in China, how these movies stack up. Because for a long time, I've said this, and I think that the conventional wisdom said that this could definitely be a possibility, was the fact that maybe that The Rock was the driver, or a large driver of the success of this franchise internationally, and that if you pluck him out, then you can replicate that success with the different franchise. And I think it may be that the franchise drives more through name recognition and through the other cast members
Yeah.
than maybe they've even been given credit for. And I know the last thing Vin Diesel needs is something else to inflate his ego.
Yeah.
But
This is going to go straight to Tyrese's head.
he does like numbers, though. We know that Vin Diesel likes numbers because he made a whole fight chart, apparently, about how to win fights. That's what I read.
About how many times he was allowed
How
to be
many times you can be punched and assigning a number value to it, which appeals to me on a numbers level.
Sure.
But I really do think that one thing to watch with Hobbs and Shaw is when it comes down to it, I think maybe our thoughts of this franchise and everyone's role in it may be slightly adjusted, because it could be that the Fast and the Furious is a bigger draw on its own than we had given it credit for.
Yeah.
So yeah, there you go. We'll tell. We're going to keep
find
watching.
out soon.
We'll find out soon. Like I said, the end of the month, China, a huge piece of the puzzle. Depending on how that goes, I think, Hobbs and Shaw is setting up a lot of its own world. So I think it's going to be very interesting to track and see, do they continue to build that out? Do they lower expectation a little bit and say, like, we're fine with $600-700 million and we're going to budget that accordingly? Or do they say, all right, you know what? We're going to fold this back into the Fate of the Furious and or Fast and the Furious, and just kind of try to have our cake and eat it too, and figure out how to get these two crazy people on a set together or in a green screen or something. We'll find out. Not that everyone, all movie stars are crazy.
They've been shooting around it for a few movies already. They'll be fine. So we'll see. They're on different missions in different countries.
Yeah, exactly. They can do like Skype or something.
Yeah, they'll be fine.
Anyway, I think it's going to be very interesting to see where Fast and the Furious goes from here. Lon, let's look at 2019 domestically. There was some motion on both the worldwide and the domestic charts. The Lion King has jumped over Captain Marvel and Toy Story 4 to become the second highest grossing film domestically of 2019. Captain Marvel drops down to 3, Toy Story 4 drops down to 4. Spider-Man jumped over Aladdin. It's now the 5th highest grossing film of the year, and Aladdin dropped down to 6. Us, John Wick, How to Train Your Dragon, and Secret Life of Pets remain 7, 8, 9, and 10. We're going to see probably, well, I don't know. We may see some other films in there.
Summer's definitely winding down.
Summer is winding down.
Hobbs and Shaw was the last huge juggernaut, I feel like.
You got some August surprises, though. You never know.
Right.
You never know.
Now is the time where, like something we didn't maybe expect could bubble up and go huge.
Yep. Worldwide on 2019, we also had a little bit of motion. The Avengers obviously still number 1, but The Lion King jumps 3 spots. It is now the second highest grossing film of the year. It crossed the $1 billion threshold and is now at almost $1.2 billion. It passes Captain Marvel, it passes Spider-Man, it passes Aladdin. Toy Story 4 inching closer. It's now about $41 million away from crossing that $1 billion mark. That'll be the 6th movie this year and the 5th Disney movie this year to do that. That's pretty insane.
Yeah.
And then Neja, I think, maybe next week.
Could knock
I think it's probable
there.
next week that Neja may come in and knock Alita off that list to become the 10th highest grossing film of the year worldwide.
Kicked out of Zalem.
Sorry. Kicked out of Zalem. Sorry, Alita.
No one gets back. That's the tragedy.
They have to play motorball to get back up there.
Ultimate champion.
Let's look at the summer movie report. As Lon mentioned, we're in the last month of the summer, but there's still motion going on the chart, and we're starting to resolve some things, Lon. The Lion King, barring some kind of a massive, huge surprise, The Lion King is going to be the number 1 movie of the summer.
48 meters down has a real breakout.
48 meters down does $500 million here in the U.S. It can unseat The Lion King, but it looks like The Lion King will be your number 1 movie of the summer.
Strong bet.
Toy Story 4 very likely to be your number 2 movie of the summer, and then I think Spider-Man's probably going to be pretty entrenched there at number 3. And Aladdin there at number 4. I think those are probably your top 4 in order, 1, 2, 3, and 4.
Looks like it.
And then the rest of it just depends on how everything else does. As I mentioned, Men in Black International, actually probably today or tomorrow, will be gone from that list. That will be replaced by Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. We'll see what Hobbs and Shaw does this week and next week. That could also be on the list. And then once Hobbs and Shaw and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood are there, that may be your list. Although, if Once Upon a Time in Hollywood hits a roadblock and comes in below Rocket Man, that still has a shot at sticking in there. If Hobbs and Shaw takes a big dive and stalls out, you never know. So the bottom part of that list still in flux. The top 4, pretty much set. We're pretty set there. So we're starting to write some stuff in ink, in permanent ink.
It's Lion King. The winner is Lion King.
And who we knew it was going to be one of the Disney.
It was. I thought Toy Story 4, but it was back and forth.
I think I said Lion King.
I'm pretty sure I went with Toy Story 4, but it was those two. It was those two.
It's those two.
Yeah.
Lon, we had one wide release opening last week with Hobbs and Shaw. This week we have 5. Welcome to August. We've got 5 wide
Everybody's
releases.
competing, yeah.
We've got The Art of Racing in the Rain.
Oh, it's a sad
which
dog
is about
movie.
a dog. A dog and
you could tell
Milo
from the
Ventimiglia.
ads it's going to be a sad dog movie.
It's like a picture of Milo Ventimiglia, the star of the most cry-inducing show on television, and a dog, and a thing that says, "From the studio that brought you Marley and Me."
It's like, there's no chance this dog survives
You're
this
not
movie.
gonna cry in that film.
That dog's not surviving that movie, guys.
That is not gonna happen.
That's not a spoiler because I don't know anything.
I don't know anything about it either, but it's
spoiler alert. That dog's gonna die.
If I was laying odds, it doesn't look good.
It's not looking good.
It doesn't look good.
No.
Not the movie, just the outlook for you not crying in the film.
Oh man!
So The Art of Racing in the Rain, Dora and the Lost City of Gold, Dora the Explorer.
Yeah, I'm very curious about this because how, like, we all know that Dora's the kind of show that, like, you put on the TV and you plunk a little kid in front of it, and like they're gonna be entertained and they're gonna talk back to Dora and whatever. But does that translate years later into, like, I want to go see this action movie that's loosely based on that? I'm not convinced. I don't know.
It's such a crowded week too.
It's such a crowded week. I don't know the show, the source material that well, obviously, but looking at the trailers, like, it doesn't really look like itself. Like, this movie doesn't really resemble that show. But also, the kids who were into that show would be much older. Like, I don't know.
I don't know. We'll see. It could have breakout potential. You never know.
It's a very famous IP. Like, even old farts like myself, who were way too old to have ever watched that show, know what Dora the Explorer is.
Exactly. Yeah, I'm far too old to have watched it, but like, it's one of those things that you just know that permeates the consciousness that you know.
Like, Michael Pena's in it. Like, it doesn't even look like it would be terrible. It looks like it might even be kind of fun. So I don't know. I'm very curious.
The Kitchen opens. This is the cast of this movie is really intriguing. It's Tiffany Haddish. It's Elizabeth Moss and Melissa McCarthy.
And it's based on a graphic novel, like a really well-liked, well-reviewed graphic novel.
I'm anxious to see this.
I thought this one would get more of a fall. This
like
feels
the Widow's push?
Yeah, this feels like more of an October, like maybe we'll get a nomination for somebody. Kind of putting it out now makes me feel like they don't feel that confident in it.
Yeah. Well, we'll see.
We'll see.
Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark opens this week.
Based on a beloved series of children's books from the early 80s.
Yeah, I used to read them. Now that is one thing. When I was a kid, I read these books.
I did too, and they were really intense and freaky.
They're very grotesque.
The stories aren't really that scary. It's those drawings. They have these really creepy, haunting, gross drawings.
And they're really leaning into that.
Oh yeah, all the monsters in the movie look like the drawings from the old book. Guillermo del Toro produced. It's by the director of The Autopsy of Jane Doe and Troll Hunter. Did you ever see The Autopsy?
I did not. I heard about it.
It's a really fun little horror movie with Brian Cox. I really recommend it.
And then opening in 1,500 theaters is a movie called, about 1,500 theaters, a movie called Brian Banks, which is a very heavy movie about a man who's fighting for his freedom, is sent to prison. But the odd thing, and it reminds me a little bit of Green Book with Peter Farrelly. The director of Brian Banks is a Tom Shadyac.
Oh,
whose last feature film as a director was Evan Almighty, Bruce Almighty, Ace Ventura, Liar. He
made a lot of those big goofy Jim Carrey 90s movies.
Yes Man, I think also. Tom Shadyac, been gone for a while, comes back with a serious drama. Yeah. So another example of one of these comedy directors from the, known for comedy.
I believe he did do Patch Adams, right? Which is kind of towing that.
But it's still a Robin
comedy
Williams
drama that's on the line.
I mean, I think it was kind of a horror movie myself.
Not great, but it was it had a serious message in addition to being funny.
But I mean, this is like a drama.
Yeah, no.
This is a trend that we're seeing lately. It's odd. It's like if you directed a comedy with Jim Carrey in the 90s,
you get to direct a drama in the
2010s. Yeah. So Brian Banks, I've not heard much about it, but that's hitting about 1,500 theaters this weekend. So plenty of new options for you. If you're looking for something new to see this weekend, you got plenty of options.
Scary Stories is an interesting one, too, because it's PG-13, so they're aiming at a younger audience. But I just don't know, is there a lot of cultural relevance to that book anymore?
Well, I believe you will see our review here on Thursday. The screening is on Wednesday.
I've seen it already.
So Lon's seen it, but he can't say anything. So I have not seen it, and you can see my review of it here on Thursday, as well as I might be able to catch one or two others of these, and I'll let you know as well. But Lon, that's the charts for this week. Good charts. Next week, it'll be interesting to see how many of these break into the top 5. There's some entrenched movies in there, like dug in, like with their claws movies.
I like weeks where we get a variety of new releases. For the summer, you get a lot of weeks where it's like, well, we all know what the big one was this week. Next week is a real mystery.
We got Hobbs and Shaw, we got Lion King, we got does Tarantino hold up with Once Upon a Time in Hollywood and Toy Story and Spider-Man? How will they hold on?
And then like we're injecting scary stories into the mix.
No, it's going to be really interesting next week. So stay tuned. Next week, we're going to have a cornucopia of new things to talk about. Thank you for watching, and we will be back to recap everything else. And stay tuned here on Fandom Entertainment. We have SJU every morning. We've got the latest news and reviews. And tomorrow, we have the premiere of the newest episode of Fandom Uncovered.
Ah, that's right.
So please stay tuned for that. Yeah, we have all seen that. And just generally, if you're out there, it can be a tough world sometimes. And find something that makes you happy. Sometimes it can get real difficult to just see and hear everything that's out there, and try to take some time being happy for even a couple of hours by watching one of your favorite movies or just doing something that you love doesn't mean that you're excusing anything or ignoring anything. It's important to find those moments that bring you joy and that remind you of what you love. So, hang in there.
Yeah. I mean, movies can be they're designed to be an escape. You can escape into a movie for a few hours and get your mind off things. And that's perfectly all right.
Yeah. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next week.